I've got a small problem. I want to tell you about today's track, but I need to make a phone call first.
Yeah, what's up, man?
I'm calling for a very funny reason.
I don't know exactly how I should be pronouncing your name.
DELA. Okay, that's exactly what I was wondering. Okay. It's DELA, Victoria. Today's going to be a little tricky. Let's back up. We're working on a song today called By Joshua, DELA, Victoria, and Myself. Except we don't even have a song yet. That means I'm actually taking you guys on the journey through the creation process, from riff to rhythm to release. The first thing I did was I listened to the synth riff that Josh sent over. It took me a minute to get a handle on the rhythm. It's not only in an odd time signature, but it also has some pretty unusual groupings within that as well. Today we're going to break down not just the way to understand this pattern, but also a lot of other odd time signatures and odd groupings as well. If you break this down, we are in 7/4 time. That's 7 quarter notes per measure. To make things more difficult, we have these groupings of 16th notes within the 7/4 time that we have to pay attention to. It's a really cool riff, but it's not easy at first. Luckily, right within Pro Tools, we can slow the tempo down from 147 to 130 or even 100 if we really want to analyze what's going on here, and we can then practice it at a slower speed and really get a handle on what we want to do. And by we, I mean me, I'm playing the drums, so. And now, welcome to a new segment I'd like to call Odd Time Signatures with Dimitri Fantini. Now at this point, your first question might be, what is an odd time signature? The time signature of a piece of music tells us how many pulses are in each measure. An odd time signature simply means that the number of pulses within each measure is an odd number of pulses. So you could have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 pulses, but 1 pulse per measure comes up so rarely, and 3 pulses per measure is so common that we're not going to take a look at that today. Now here are some terms that I'm just making up as I go along. The first is what I would call big time. Big time is when the time signature tells you the number of quarter notes per measure. And yes, in this case, we'll be talking about an odd number of quarter notes. Made up term number 2. Medium time is when the time signature is denoting the number of eighth notes per measure. Again, we'll be talking about odd numbers of eighth notes. And now, my favorite made-up term, tiny time. That's kind of fun to say. This is when the time signature is determining the number of 16th notes in a measure. Today's example is an odd time signature of 7, and you can think about this in a number of ways. First, we have 7/4. 7/4 is when there are 7 quarter notes per bar. 7/8 means that there are 7 eighth notes in a bar. And finally, 7/16 means there are 7 16th notes exactly in one measure. Let's take a closer look at that 7/16. The most common way to learn to feel odd time signatures in a more natural way is to split the odd number of pulses into smaller chunks of 2, 3, or 4. We'll do that today by splitting these 7 pulses into a group of 4 and a group of 3. All you have to do is evenly count to 4 and then 3 and then repeat. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Let's try speeding it up a little. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. And back to 7/8. The time signature of 7/8 of course means there are 7 eighth note pulses within that measure, but in those eighth notes you can continue to subdivide. If you double the number of notes you play in that space of time, you're then playing 16th notes. So instead of 7 eighth notes, we're now playing twice the number of notes within each measure. They happen to be twice as fast, or 16th notes. So the number of 16th notes within one bar of 7/8 time is 14 16th notes. Just like before, we can take each group of 7 16th notes and divide it into a group of 4 and a group of 3. So we have 4 16th notes, 3 16th notes, 4 notes, 3 notes. And all of that totals 14 16th notes again. But when we're dealing with the smaller, easier to manage groupings of 4 and 3, they don't have to be in that order. You could just as easily group 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 3 and get the exact same number of 16th notes. Those first 8 16th notes are also the equivalent to 4 eighth notes. And just the same, those 3 plus 3 or 6 16th notes fit perfectly within 3 eighth notes. So what does this have to do with the song at hand? The rhythmic figure that Josh and I are working on together can be simplified into 4 smaller rhythms. We have a grouping of 4 and a grouping of 3, or 7 16th notes again. And then we repeat that grouping a second time, 4 and 3. But here is where things get really rhythmically interesting. After the first 2 groupings that can be thought of as groupings of 7, the next part of the rhythmic figure plays a grouping of 4, and then 4, and then 3, and then 3. That's 14 notes long again. You can think of that as 14 16th notes, or those 16th notes could be subdivisions of a larger 7/8 time. So if you're interpreting this as a grouping of 7, and then 14 notes, you end up with a 28 note pattern. But this is all terribly confusing. Those 28 notes can all be derived from 4 groupings of 7 16th notes. Now the final piece of the puzzle is that this entire rhythm gets much easier to understand when you learn the rhythm relative to the 7/4 quarter note pulse. And that's what we're doing now. So here's what the track sounds like at 1:47. Now I'm going to change the tempo in my DAW to 120. All the tracks are going to stretch to match. Now at 100 we can really break it down and look at all the math and how it lines up.